Friendsify you want to watch super hit movie Cry Macho in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel West Film Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Cry Macho. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will watch this movie. This video is produced by West Film. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So, start the video. Cry Macho is a 2021 American EO Western drama film directed and produced by Clint Eastwood and written by Schenk and Richard Nash, based on Nash's 1975 novel. Set in 1979, it stars Eastwood as a former rodeo star hired to reunite a young boy, Eduardo Minett, in Mexico with his father, Dwight Yoakam, in the United States. There were many attempts to adapt Nash's novel into a film over the years. Arnold Schwarzenegger came on board to star in 2011, but canceled after a scandal. In 2020, Eastwood's adaptation was announced. He produced the film with Albert S. Ruddy in his final film before his death, Tim Moore, and Jessica Meier. Cry Macho was filmed from November to December 2020 in the state of New Mexico. Ben Davis was the cinematographer, Mark Mancina was the composer, and Joel and David Cox were the editors. It was theatrically released in the United States on September 17, 2021 by Warner Bros. Pictures, with a simultaneous 31-day release on the HBO Max streaming service. The film underperformed at the box office, grossing $16 million against a $33 million budget. It received mixed reviews, with its visuals and score receiving praise while the screenplay was targeted for criticism. Eastwood's performance drew polarized responses. Plot. By 1979, Texan rodeo star Mike Milo has retired due to a severe back injury. The following year, his former boss, Howard Polk, a ranch owner, hires him to travel to Mexico City and bring Howard's 15-year-old son, Raffo, to live with him. He agrees, and upon reaching Mexico City, he meets the boy's mother, Leda, who runs several illicit businesses. She pretends to be agreeable, as previous attempts by Howard to get the boy have failed, and tells him that Raffo has turned to a life of crime and participates in cockfights with his rooster, Macho. Soon after, Mike finds Raffo participating in a cockfight that is interrupted by a police raid. After the police depart, Mike approaches Raffo and tells him that his father wants him to come and live with him. Although he has misgivings, Raffo, intrigued, agrees to go with Mike back to Texas and leaves to collect his things. Mike then reports to Leda that he and Raffo are leaving, whereupon she becomes hostile, threatening him should he proceed further. After Mike leaves, Leda orders several of her henchmen to follow him. Mike then sets off back to Texas alone, but discovers that Raffo has snuck into his truck with Macho. When Raffo steals his wallet and shares his desire to spend time with his father, Mike agrees to take him after all. During the drive there, the pair share stories about their lives, including how Leda's henchmen used to abuse Raffo, and discuss the meaning of being macho. At a restaurant, Mike phones Howard and tells him that he has found Raffo. Outside of the restaurant, one of Leda's henchmen, Aurelio, tries to forcefully take Raffo and tells the locals that Mike has kidnapped him. Raffo yells out that Aurelio is a molester, and they beat him up. After Mike and Raffo leave, Mike's truck is stolen by thieves. Walking to the next town, Mike buys new clothes to fit in better, and Raffo borrows an abandoned car to use. At a cantina, they meet the owner, Marta, who helps them evade police officers searching for them. They hit the road, only to turn around after passing through one of the many police checkpoints along the highway. Returning to the town during a rainstorm, they seek shelter in a shrine. Mike tells Raffo that he lost his wife and children in a car accident. Recognizing the car, Marta finds them and brings them breakfast. Raffo discovers their car has a leak, and Mike tells him they have to stay put for now. After coming across a ranch, Mike offers his services in helping break the wild horses, in the process teaching Raffo how to ride a horse and demonstrating his love for animals. The pair return to Marta's cafe and spend some time with her family. On a phone call with Mike, Howard expresses his concern that Mike has been in Mexico for 2 weeks, longer than expected. When Aurelio and police officers turn up asking for Mike and Raffo, the two sneak away, running into Marta and saying a brief goodbye. They find a new car and start their final drive to the border. On the highway once again, Mike notices a patrol car following them and turns off suddenly to lose the tail. Mike reveals that Howard told him over the phone that he wants Raffo simply to battle Lita in court for her money. An angry Raffo tries to leave, but the police pull up and search their vehicle. When they find nothing, the police officers leave and the pair continues their journey. Whilst driving, Mike tells Raffo that being macho is overrated and encourages him to make his own decisions in life. Raffo decides that he still wants to be with his father. Aurelio then finds them, runs them off the road, and holds them at gunpoint. However, Macho jumps at him, enabling Mike to grab his gun. They then use Aurelio's car to make it to the border. As a final goodbye, Raffo gives Macho to Mike before reuniting with his father. Mike remains on the Mexican side of the border and returns to Marta. Cast: Clint Eastwood as Mike Milo,
Eduardo Minett as Raffo,
Natalia Travin as Marta, Dwight Yoakam as Howard Polk,
Fernanda Urrejola as Leta, Horacio Garcia Rojas as Aurelio.
Production background: the novel Cry Macho, which the film adapts, was originally written as a screenplay by author N. Richard Nash. Sometime in the 1970s, 20th Century Fox received the script and rejected it twice. To compensate, he reworked the material, turned it into a novel, and had it published in 1975. It was so well received that Nash decided to pitch the screenplay again, without changing a word, and sold it to a studio. In Hollywood, producer Albert S. Ruddy spent decades trying to adapt the novel into a movie. In 1988, Ruddy gave Clint Eastwood the opportunity to star. Eastwood declined the role and suggested Robert Mitchum. In 1991, an adaptation starring Roy Scheider started filming in Mexico, but was never completed. Other actors on board to star at one point included Burt Lancaster and Pierce Brosnan. In 2003, Arnold Schwarzenegger was given the option of starring in either a Westworld remake or a Cry Macho adaptation. He chose the latter, but put it on hold when he was elected governor of California. In 2011, he said his first movie after his time as governor would be Cry Macho, with Brad Furman at the helm and filming set to take place in New Mexico. However, the project was canceled after Schwarzenegger's divorce with Maria Shriver, following the revelation that he had fathered a son a decade earlier with an employee in their household. Development. In October 2020, Warner Bros. Pictures announced Eastwood would produce, direct, and star in an adaptation of the novel. The screenplay included additional contributions by Nick Schenk, who previously worked with Eastwood on Gran Torino 2008 and The Mule 2018, with cinematographer Ben Davis. Filming moved to Socorro County on November 16th and concluded on November 30th. In December, filming took place in Belen, New Mexico, with Montaño's family restaurant turned into a cafe for the shoot. Crew members had to follow safety protocols due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Filming concluded on December 15th, 2020, a day ahead of schedule. The rest of the cast was revealed later that month. According to the New Mexico State Film Office, the production employed 250 crew, 10 supporting cast members, and over 600 local background extras. Filming locations included the counties of Bernalillo, Sandoval, Sierra, and Valencia. Eastwood recalled rehiring a young cast member who had received a false positive for the coronavirus. He mentioned the many difficulties of filming scenes with Macho, the rooster in the film, who was played by 11 birds. The film features Eastwood riding a horse, which he last did on film for Unforgiven in 1992. Eastwood said that the Wrangler was worried. When asked about acting at the age of 90 and rejecting the role in 1988, Eastwood said, "I always thought I'd go back and look at that. It was something I had to grow into. One day I just felt it was time to revisit it. It's fun when something's your age, when you don't have to work at being older. During post-production, Joel and David Cox edited the film and Mark Mancina composed the score. The soundtrack album, released by Water Tower Music on September 10, 2021, features an original song, Find a New Home, written by Mancina and performed by Will Bannister. Warner Bros. Discovery CEO David Zaslav criticized the studio's decision to finance the film. Warner executives allegedly said that although they knew the film was unlikely to turn a profit, they felt indebted to Eastwood for his decades-long relationship with the studio and his consistent ability to deliver films under budget and on time. Marketing. The marketing campaign for Cry Macho began on August 5, 2021, when two sets of first-look images, a theatrical release poster, and a trailer were released. In a statement to Entertainment Weekly, Eastwood said the film was about a man who starts his life over again. Based on the promotional material, Empire's James White said the film would be Eastwood's latest examination of the changing face of machismo. William Hughes from the AV. Club said the trailer expressed more heartwarming elements, advice, definitions of masculinity, cockfighting, while focusing on the relationship between Eastwood and the kid he's maybe sort of kidnapped. In late August, representatives from Warner Brothers Pictures discussed how the studio would release its films in the future, said they had found a way to make it work, and presented a pre-recorded hour-long reel showcasing their upcoming projects at CinemaCon, which included the trailer for Cry Macho and a special tribute piece for Eastwood. In September, several featurettes with a focus on Eastwood's career were released, featuring several clips from Cry Macho and Eastwood's filmography, alongside recorded messages from producers Albert S. Ruddy and Tim Moore, as well as Morgan Freeman, Mel Gibson, Gene Hackman, John Lee Hancock, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Meryl Streep, and Hilary Swank. In their review of the footage, Eric Vespi from Film said, "As far as the movie it is promoting is concerned, I can't say I'm more or less excited to see it. But as a film fan, I do appreciate that we're showing Clint Eastwood the love and appreciation he deserves while he's still with us. There is something about seeing Eastwood in a cowboy hat, sitting on a horse, that just feels right, you know? It's no wonder that so much real estate is dedicated to that aspect of his new movie in this clever bit of marketing." Yahoo News wrote that it is safe to say that Eastwood fans will feel all kinds of emotions when they see him back in the saddle. After the film was released, however, Forbes said Cry Macho was going to flop at the box office because the marketing allure of see Clint Eastwood on screen one last time was going to wear off. Cry Macho was theatrically released in the United States on September 17, 2021 by Warner Bros. Pictures, with a simultaneous release on the HBO Max streaming service for 31 days. The film was originally set to premiere on October 22nd, but was pushed forward as a result of a release date shuffle with Dune and The Many Saints of Newark. The film opened the 2021 Tokyo International Film Festival on October 30th, 2021. It was released on digital formats on November 5th, 2021, with a physical release on Blu-ray and DVD, in addition to a manufacture-on-demand 4K Blu-ray from the studio distribution services on December 7th, 2021. Reception. Audience viewership. According to Samba TV, which measures its results from a sample of 3 million households and only counts a view if the film was watched for at least 5 minutes, Cry Macho was streamed on HBO Max in 693,000 households in its first 3 days, tying with the viewership numbers of In the Heights. Online audiences were generally over the age of 65 and 35% Hispanic. By the end of its first month, the film had been watched in over 1.6 million households in the United States. Box office. Cry Macho grossed $10.3 million in the United States and Canada and $6.2 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $16.5 million. The film received a wide release in 3,967 theaters alongside Cop Shop on September 17, 2021, 55. Box office analytics from Variety and The Wrap estimated that it would gross between $5 to $10 million in its opening weekend. Box Office Pro predicted a $1 to $5 million opening and $2 to $15 million total gross in the United States and Canada. The Wrap's Jeremy Fooster predicted older male demographics would most likely stream the film on HBO Max and would go see it in theaters only if it received positive word of mouth. In a statement to The Wrap, ComScore analyst Paul Durger-Abedian said, "This is yet another test of the hybrid model with its own twist. While the theatrical model is generally better for bigger blockbusters, Cry Macho could get a serious boost from HBO Max, given that the audience it is aiming for is still showing reluctance in showing up to theaters." The film made $4.4 million in its opening weekend for a per-theater average of $1,150, finishing third at the box office. Audiences were 79% over the age of 35, 51% female, and 66% Caucasian, 14% Latino, 8% Black, and 12% Asian or other. The analytics firm Intelligence said older patrons saw the film in theaters early in the afternoon, with 88% of all audiences showing up before 8 p.m. Additionally, early screenings cost an average of $10.77 per ticket, less than the $13 average for the limited releases of Blue Bayou and The Eyes of Tammy Faye. Variety describes the film's poor performance at the box office as being similar to recent releases from Warner Bros. Pictures during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as Reminiscence and Malignant. In its second weekend, Cry Macho suffered a 53.8% decline and grossed $2.5 million in 4,022 theaters, placing fifth. Worldwide, Cry Macho made an estimated $350,000 during its opening weekend in 585 theaters and $414,000 in its second weekend across 18 foreign markets. 2 months after its original release, the film opened in the UK and Ireland on November 12, 2021-6. That same week, the film made $932,000 across 12 foreign markets. As of December 28, 2021, the film's largest markets were Spain, $835,056, Italy, $831,284, France, $810,000, Portugal, $190,096, Greece, $106,000, the UK, $96,742, Mexico, $95,000, Argentina, $82,000, and the Netherlands, $33,366. Critical response? On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 57% of 178 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.610. The website's consensus reads, "Cry Macho proves Clint Eastwood remains an economic filmmaker and charismatic screen presence, albeit one who's an awkward fit for this particular project." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 58 out of 100, based on 44 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews 69. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale, while PostTrack reported 73% of audience members gave it a positive score. Several aspects of Cry Macho received a polarized response, including its tone, themes, and execution. Variety's Owen Gleiberman praised Eastwood's direction for keeping the story simple in an inoffensive and good-natured way. Glenn Kenny, writing for RogerEbert.com, gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, lauding it for its cinematography and second act, where small events transpire in beautifully shot, unhurried scenes. The simple sincerity about what's worthwhile in life is the movie's reason for being. Nothing more and nothing less. From the New York Times, A.O. Scott found it to be a hangout movie with nothing much to prove and just enough to say, gave positive feedback to the film's score and scenery, and wrote about Eastwood, "If the old man's driving, my advice is to get in and enjoy the ride." Nick Schenk's screenplay received generally negative reviews and was called weak by CNN's Brian Lowry and G. Allen Johnson from the San Francisco Chronicle. In a mixed review, David Rooney from The Hollywood Reporter described it as the kind of movie where, rather than let the audience observe the gradual development of a mutual understanding, we get Eastwood's Mike Milo spelling it out. From the Los Angeles Times, Justin Chang wrote that the film's themes tackling machismo were well supported by the performances of the leads, but said the story was repetitive and too similar to Gran Torino and the Mule. The Guardian's Benjamin Lee gave the film 2 stars out of 5, writing that it consists of scene after scene of nothing, not a funny line or a moving moment or an unresolved conflict, just nothing. The New Yorker's Richard Brody added that the movie's heartening adventure gets its retrospective, tall-tale air from its implication of narrow, quasi-miraculous escapes, from the very suggestion of its implausibility. Eastwood's role in the film also divided critics. Vulture's Bill Jabiri said filmgoers would enjoy Eastwood's presence because of his filmography, and added, "The picture doesn't always work, but it works when it has to." The same could be said for its star. Somehow, when we look at Mike, we don't see Eastwood, the 91-year-old actor, but Clint, the icon, not so much ageless as preserved in weathered glory, cinema's forever-haunted cowboy. The Atlantic's David Sims praised Eastwood's charm and use of the film to reflect on his career, writing that the actor has tended toward bluntness, casting a baleful eye over his career while telling a tale of a man who still has more to learn. Oliver Jones from the New York Observer disagreed and said Cry Macho would disappoint filmgoers, leaving them with wistful memories of what once was. Clint Eastwood still looks good in a cowboy hat. His latest outing is a gentle road movie, which sees the actor-director happily retreating safe, reliable territory. All feels right in the world as we watch him sleeping under the stars, romancing a widowed restaurant owner, and tenderly taming wild horses. Eastwood plays Mike Milo, a real cowboy, according to boss Howard, Dwight Yoakam, the film's weakest link. His mission is to cross the border from Texas to Mexico and retrieve Howard's rebellious 13-year-old son, Raffo, Eduardo Minett, from his feckless gold-digging mother, Leta, Fernanda Urahola. Also along for the ride is Raffo's cockfighting rooster, Macho. Eastwood and Minett have wonderful chemistry as 2 lone rangers with plenty to learn from each other. "You're angry. It's bad for you at your age," chides Raffo. Yet beneath Mike's brittle, taciturn exterior is a big old softy. He's simply the strong, silent type, his toughness tempered by good manners, family values, and a fondness for animals. "This Macho thing, it's overrated," he tells the boy. There's something touching about seeing the 91-year-old Eastwood in such a reflective mood. Clint Eastwood will be 92 next May. Now, to take a particular kind of stock of this fact. The Portuguese director Manuel de Oliveira lived to be 106, and he completed his final film in 2015, the year he died. So when we are talking about Eastwood's ostensibly late filmography, and we consider the speediness with which he completes his films, which some insist also yields slapdash results, the fake baby from 2014's American Sniper standing as Exhibit A, we can consider that he may actually have another 14 or 15 movies in him yet. That's worth noting when we're talking, as we are now, of his late filmography. Because even if Eastwood keeps up his filmmaking pace for another decade or more, Cry Macho, which he directed from a long, kicking-around script by Nick Schenk and N. Richard Nash, and which began as a 1975 novel by Nash, and this movie adapts it very loosely, to say the least, will end up one of his more unusual films. Its title and trailer suggest a potentially blistering and likely rueful action thriller. The movie itself is something wholly other. For its first 20 minutes or so, one may look through the fingers of a facepalm trying to figure out just what it is. Gorgeous vistas of western sunrises and starkly beautiful desert plains alternate with story-establishing scenes in very awkwardly on-the-nose registers. Starting in 1979, the movie depicts Eastwood's Mike Milo showing up at the horse ranch of Dwight Yoakam's Howard Polk well after the lunch hour. Howard tells Mike he's late, and Mike says, "For what?" Howard then lays into Mike with scrolls worth of expository dialogue, evoking Mike, the one-time rodeo star, mentioning the inevitable career-ending accident, and so on. "Before the pills, before the booze," Yoakam proclaims in decidedly declamatory tones, dropping the hammer with, "You're a loss to no one." He fires Mike, and then we cut to a year later when he rehires Mike, asking him to go to Mexico and kidnap his now teenage son, who lives with his hard-partying mother, Lita, in an abusive household. Mike takes the shady gig. He owes Howard still for something. Things remain awkward when Mike gets to Mexico and finds Leda in a mansion, attended by 2 bodyguards, and telling Mike he's welcome to the kid, a gambler, drinker, and cockfighter named Rafa Eduardo Minett, and not even 14 yet, if Mike can find him. The hotsy-totsy, irresponsible mother even tries to lure Mike to her bed, which is a bit of a stretch. One thing Eastwood's continuing career on screen is teaching us is that there are discrete gradations of old. As written, Mike Milo ought to be a character in his late 60s to mid-70s. As good as Eastwood may look, 90 or 91 is not late 60s to mid-70s. In matters of personal intimacy, even if the spirit and the flesh are equally up to the task, the most game woman on earth is going to think twice about jumping the bones of a nonagenarian lest she shatter them. You're probably wondering when this movie gets good enough to warrant my rating. To be perfectly frank, it does require some patience, if not indulgence. Mike discovers Rafa. Rafa is indeed a cockfighter, and he's named his rooster Macho. They make it out of a police raid on a cockfight and hit the road, one of Leda's bodyguards trailing them. Rafa is wide-eyed at the prospect of living on a Texas horse ranch. As Howard assured Mike, the kid is crazy about cowboys. As the two get to know each other, Mike expresses to Rafa his hard-bitten skepticism about overvaluing toughness. Macho itself, as it was popularly called both north and south of the border in the period in which the film is set. This is all pleasing and a little predictable. Where the film really blossoms is after the midsection. After some narrow evasions of both bodyguards and cops and some hasty car switching, Mike and Rafa find themselves in a small Mexican town not too far from the border. They take shelter in a homey restaurant owned by a middle-aged woman named Marta, Natalia Travin, and later in a small shrine to the Virgin Mary on the outskirts of the town. The two come upon a horse ranch where Mike offers his services in breaking the wild ones. He also teaches Rafa to ride, saying he won't be much use in Texas if he doesn't know how to ride. Mike is good with animals, so soon the town locals start treating him as if he's a vet. Mike and Rafa meet Marta's grandchildren, one of whom is deaf. Mike can sign, and he makes an immediate, vital connection with the little girl. These small events transpire in beautifully shot, unhurried scenes. This is Eastwood's version of pastoral. Mike pieces his ruined life back together in a sense. He finds pleasure in being of service to a community. The professed agnostic takes Marta's hand when she prays to begin a meal, and likes it. The simple sincerity about what's worthwhile in life is the movie's reason for being. Nothing more and nothing less. Cry Macho. Review: I'm sorry to say that Clint Eastwood's latest feature film is a dud. Plain and simple. I had hopes that Cry Macho would be an interesting adventure film about a harrowing rescue. This isn't an adventure, and it's certainly not interesting. The dialogue is dull, the story is largely empty, and the acting is only average at best. This film does prove that Eastwood can still give a pretty good performance even at 91, but what this film also proves is that an actor can't save a film that script is helplessly lacking. I'm not a Clint Eastwood superfan, but I am a very big fan of several of his past projects. Million Dollar Baby and The Bridges of Madison County are, in my opinion, two of the best films ever made. It's clear that Eastwood has what it takes, but goodness, he's left twisting in the wind in this hollow snore. The script has a myriad of problems, including inane dialogue, a shallow story, and odd out-of-place moments. The dialogue between the characters never moves beyond the cheesiest, most stereotypical lines you could come up with. Many times I couldn't help but just roll my eyes or laugh at these characters' conversations. Cry Macho wants to come off as dramatic and heartwarming, but it's all so surface level and lazy. The story also wants to have a sweet and endearing feel, but almost nothing about it rings true. I was surprised at how hollow this plot turned out to be. There's no effort to dig down into these characters, and there's certainly no effort to construct an engaging story that keeps viewers entertained. I wouldn't be shocked if people fall asleep while watching this thing. And this is no Western, by the way. Just because a film takes place in the desert doesn't make it a Western. No, Cry Macho is ultimately a poorly made drama. This is almost like Hallmark's version of a Western. There are several random moments of suspense among the sappy drama. These moments come off as totally jarring. It's like the plot can't decide what it wants to be. And these weak, odd moments are over and done with so quickly that it makes you wonder what the point was. And the choice to have a pet rooster accompany Eastwood and Minett on their journey was not a wise one. Everything surrounding the rooster just comes off as strange and laughable, not in an intentional way. Clint Eastwood's lead performance is serviceable. He seems to be trying his absolute best to overcome this exceptionally weak material. The rest of the cast is all right for the most part, although Eduardo Minett has several scenes where it's clear he needs some more training if he should continue in acting. Yoakam doesn't really have a lot to do in his minor role as Eastwood's former boss that sends him on this journey to retrieve his son. Although I'm not terribly familiar with Yoakam, I remember his fine performance in Panic Room. He doesn't get any real opportunity to shine. Now, I will say that I did enjoy Natalia Travin in her supporting role as Marta. She provides a nice, endearing presence. Although the script doesn't give her very good material, she does a lot merely with her face. I hope to see more from her in the future. Over Clint Eastwood's decades-long career, the Western is a genre in which he's made a considerable impact. Some of his finest works, including Best Picture winner Unforgiven, were Westerns, which is why it's always interesting to see the Hollywood legend return to this well. Never one to slow down, the now 91-year-old Eastwood directs and stars in Cry Macho, based on the novel of the same name by N. Richard Nash, who also co-wrote the screenplay. A few of Eastwood's late-period films have been well received, but this one falls short of the mark a bit. Cry Macho is a fairly standard Western hampered by a thin story, which prevents it from reaching the heights of Eastwood's storied filmography. Eastwood stars as Mike Milo, a former rodeo star who fell on hard times after suffering a tragedy. One day, Mike's former boss, Howard Polk, Dwight Yoakam, asks him for a favor. Howard wants Mike to travel to Mexico and bring Howard's son, Rafael, Eduardo Minett, to Texas, citing concerns the boy's mother, Leta, Fernanda Urejola, is constantly abusing him. Mike agrees to take the job and goes south of the border to find Rafael. From there, the two have to avoid the authorities and Leta's hired muscle in order to get back to the United States. Eastwood's always been an economical filmmaker, and Cry Macho doesn't waste any time in setting up the story and bringing viewers right into the plot. While that approach is welcome, Cry Macho runs 104 minutes. The primary issue is there isn't much to the narrative in terms of developments or thematic material. The story itself is quite simple, and any attempts to dig deeper below the surface, whether it's Raphael's troubled childhood or the elderly Mike's perspective on being macho, fail to leave much of an impression. Cry Macho plays with some interesting ideas, especially considering Eastwood's on-screen past and image, though there isn't enough there to make it stand out as one of the director's better offerings. The emotional core of Cry Macho is in the dynamic between Mike and Raphael, and the two make for a solid pair, whether they're carrying the film's more dramatic moments or injecting a bit of levity. Aspects of their relationship may come across as predictable. Raphael is in need of a dependable father figure, but their connection still feels earned. Minett does a good job as Raphael, finding a balance between a street-smart teen and vulnerable child looking for someone to trust. Eastwood is characteristically reliable, channeling his typical persona to bring gravitas to Mike. However, an argument can be made that at 91, he is a bit too old with regards to a subplot where he becomes something of a romantic interest for widowed grandmother Marta, Natalia Travin. As nostalgic it is to see Eastwood in his cowboy get-up riding horses, certain elements of the character's story don't land as well. Unfortunately, Mike and Raphael are the only characters with real meat to their portrayals. A majority of the supporting cast consists of stock characters that exist mainly to serve a purpose in the story. Horacio Garcia Rojas Aurelio is just an obstacle that gets in Mike and Raphael's way for a few confrontations, which are easily resolved, and Travin doesn't have much to do as Marta. This does allow Eastwood to keep the focus on Mike and Raphael's journey, but the two-dimensional ensemble does make the film drag a bit in the middle section, which could cause some viewers to lose interest. None of the actors are bad in their roles. It can just be difficult to get fully invested since the story is so thin. It is impressive to see Eastwood continue to churn out films as a director and actor, pulling triple duty for Cry Macho as he serves as producer as well. And die-hard fans who have been following his career for years will likely find something to enjoy and appreciate. However, when compared to some of Eastwood's best works, and even a handful of his more recent efforts, Cry Macho is lacking what's necessary to be a real crossover hit, and it likely won't be much of a factor come awards season. Those who love westerns and Eastwood may be inclined to seek Cry Macho out on the big screen if they feel safe, but everyone else can catch it on HBO Max. There's something comforting about seeing Eastwood in another western, but that's not enough to truly elevate this particular film. At 91, Clint Eastwood still knows how to direct a movie with a nice, clean, leisurely classical spareness, something you wish more directors knew how to do, or wanted to. As a filmmaker, Eastwood has earned the right to be called ageless. As an actor, though, he's not trying to hide his age. In Cry Macho, he plays a broken-down horse breeder and former rodeo rider who is given the task of going down to Mexico City to retrieve a 13-year-old boy, Rafael Eduardo Minett, and drive him back to Texas. He's taken the boy from his wealthy diva Mexican mother and bringing him to his American ranch owner father. Eastwood is still handsome, and he still does the Clint sneer, with one side of his mouth open a tiny bit wider than the other side. But the Clint we see in Cry Macho is bent over with a carefully combed shock of gray-white hair, skin like creased parchment, and eyes that gleam with an old person's primal vulnerability. His movements are careful, and when he speaks, the words float out of his windpipe in a way that's so cracked and dry and deliberate that at moments you can hear the old Eastwood minimalism shading off into a new Eastwood fragility. What's gone from this slow-talking, slow-moving Clint is any sense of impending danger. He throws a punch or two in Cry Macho and does it convincingly, but he also takes senior citizen siestas, and it's not as if his character is pretending that he can use his sheer strength to dominate the much younger scoundrels, bruisers, and federales who are on his tail. The way Eastwood dominates now is with the pensive simplicity of his words, his I say what I mean and mean what I say steely gentleman's directness, which has become his armchair form of machismo. How is the movie? Adapted from N. Richard Nash's 1975 novel, the script is by Nash and Eastwood regular Nick Schenk. It's friendly and diverting and formulaic in an inoffensive and good-natured way, and it's a totally minor affair. It's set in 1979 after Clint's Mike Milo has been fired by Howard Polk, his boss at the ranch, played by a blustery Dwight Yoakam. But as we learn, Mike owes Howard a lot. He saved Mike's life after he'd bottomed out. So when Mike is asked to head over the border to retrieve Howard's estranged son, he's got little choice but to go. The destination is a mansion in Mexico City where the boy's reckless and debauched mother, Fernanda Urajola, warns Mike that the kid is a wild thing, out in the gutter, attending cockfights and God knows what else. She asks Mike to please take him, and good riddance. Actually, though, she needs to hold on to her son to provide leverage for an investment deal. We're led to think that we're going to be seeing the poster child for unruly movie delinquency, but Mike shows up at a cockfight, where it takes him about 3 seconds to find the boy and his pet rooster, named Macho. Our first reaction is, the kid seems pretty nice, and so does the rooster. They are. Eduardo Minett, who has been a regular on several Mexican TV series, has a baby-faced wholesomeness and a sweet-spirited manner. Rafael has every right to be surly about Mike taking him away, but we can see from the start that he's no delinquent. His mother is just projecting. Mike still has to win him over, of course, but the movie might have had more bite to it if Rafael were in greater need of taming. He and Mike pile into Mike's two-toned Chevy Suburban and head out on the road, during which they'll get to know each other and undergo a few adventurous ordeals, none of which ever turns too dark. The car gets stolen, but that's okay. They'll soon find an abandoned one. In a parking lot, the locals get heated over what this aging gringo is doing traveling with a Mexican kid, but that's okay. They soon turn their aggression on the sinister henchman who's trying to bring the boy back. Sitting down for lunch, Raphael casually orders a tequila, but that's okay. Mike waves the order away and sets him straight. "You get too angry," Raphael tells Mike. "It's not good for you at your age." He's right about that, but Cry Macho isn't an angry Clint movie. By the time these two arrive at a makeshift ranch and Mike starts teaching the kid to ride horses, we realize that we're watching the closest thing we've seen to a Clint Eastwood after-school special. Late in the film, Clint tells the kid, whom he calls Kid, yes, it's that kind of movie, the macho thing is overrated. Which actually sounds like just the sort of reflective, ancient and wiser red state shading into blue idea that you want to hear from the preeminent macho movie star of the last half-century. The nonagenarian Clint says it like he means it. The truth is, though, that the rest of the movie doesn't quite bear it out. Even though he doesn't rule physically anymore, the Clint we see in Cry Macho is just as rooted in the domineering presence of his mystique as he ever was. He's just quieter about it. The movie turns into a romance. When they're at that ranch, the woman who runs the adjoining cantina cooks for them, and she and Clint strike up a flirtation so sly it kind of sneaks its way into the movie. The actress Natalia Travin has a face that seems to have lived just like Clint's, and it's sweet to see them pair off. But it's not more than sweet. Cry Macho is a pleasant enough placeholder for Eastwood, but I hope and suspect that down the line he's got some more macho to cry. Watching Cry Macho, there's the painful, almost agonizing realization that this could very well be Clint Eastwood's last movie. The 91-year-old actor-filmmaker, who shot the film in 1 month during the COVID-19 pandemic, can still don a cowboy hat and deliver yet another legendary performance as a leading role. He's never once lost his touch as an on-screen Western icon, with films such as Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, Hang 'em High, The Outlaw Josie Wales, Pale Rider, and his best movie, Unforgiven. However, as a director, he sounds exhausted. The adaptation of N. Richard Nash's novel of the same name on a former rodeo rider, Eastwood, who's tasked by his former boss, Dwight Yoakam, to retrieve his son, Eduardo Minett, in Mexico doesn't feel as aesthetically exciting as Eastwood's previous work. Nor does it establish a compelling sense of pace. Instead, audiences are treated to witness Eastwood's swan song to filmmaking through a debilitatingly paced neo-Western, with a drab aesthetic and cheap editing. The suspension of disbelief is too unbelievable when Eastwood is supposedly rodeoing a horse on a stable, as the movie keeps cutting from his clearly obvious stunt double to himself riding a mechanical bull, as much as the camera and cross-cutting keeps trying to hide it. It's obviously not a problem, given Eastwood's age, but it perfectly demonstrates how little he cares about continuity, or crafting gripping set pieces filled with life and raw emotion. There's a major detachment from Eastwood's usually beautiful cinematography and production design, and the film's acting. In fact, the acting is the only element that holds this film together. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can do a machismo-filled cowboy the way Eastwood has done in his career, and he's still retained the same indelible charm and the tough grit persona he's adopted throughout his films. As he walks the streets of Mexico with a cowboy hat, always wearing it snug in his head and removing it only when necessary, there's an odd sense of reminiscence permeating the way he talks and the way he walks, exactly the same way he did in films like Unforgiven and Pale Rider. Eastwood is effortlessly cool, and it's even more impressive to see him still being as menacing as ever, while always remaining composed, especially when he throws a punch at one of the film's main antagonists. Age definitely won't stop him. Eastwood is also very self-aware of his frailty and doesn't shy away from it in his role. As he says, "You can't fix old," while looking at a frail dog, you can't help but have a big smile on your face, since the line also directs the filmmaker who seems too old to play another cowboy. But he does it with such grace and admiration that Eastwood's acting skills, alongside terrific supporting work from Natalia Travin as restaurant owner Marta, holds the film together. The entire character of Michael Milo seems like a way for Eastwood to remember the legacy he left behind. For his audience and lifelong fans to say thanks to an actor and filmmaker that has continuously pushed the boundaries of genre filmmaking. He's done everything. Westerns, action films, political thrillers, biopics, sci-fi, horror, comedy, drama, the works. It's just a shame that the film's entire structure is as cliched and cyclical as it comes, and its aesthetic compositions do not match Yves Belanger's work in Eastwood's previous films. Ben Davis is an experienced cinematographer, but there are so many sequences that are poorly shot and lit due to the film's incessant inability to hide stunt doubles in an authentic way. And while there are sparse action sequences, none of them have any weight to them, as the editing is so haphazard and never allows the emotional impact of the movie to flow, that any attempt to build weight towards Eastwood's character, or any other protagonist for that matter, falls flat on its face. Because Michael feels detached from his boss's needs, there's no legitimate emotional bond that forms between him and Raphael, Minett, which makes any attempt at pulling the audience's heartstrings feel vapid and distant. The dialogue is so perfunctory, and its supporting actors, with the exception of Minett and Traven, deliver their lines with such soap opera-like ridiculousness, it almost feels like a parody of modern Western films than a serious one, with a legitimate emotional crux. Eastwood's last movie, Richard Jewell, had that emotional weight. It had serious performances from Kathy Bates, Sam Rockwell, and Paul Walter Hauser, and a gripping script that held the acting together to form Eastwood's last truly great film. Because if Cry Macho will be Eastwood's final movie as both an actor and filmmaker, at least that's what it feels like, it honestly feels like an exhausted and rushed goodbye than anything else, instead of a proper send-off for one of the most influential filmmakers and actors in the entire history of cinema. One thing about Clint Eastwood, even at 91 years old, the seasoned and often surly actor, director, and producer still plays by his own rules. His notorious and staunch independence is what led him to turn down an offer to play James Bond and pass on the lead role in Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. Yet that same self-reliance also drove many of the choices that led to his screen legend status. And when it's all said and done, few will be able to claim a more impressive or prolific career than the man with the steely squint and gravelly snarl. For over 6 decades, Eastwood has been a poster boy for stoic masculinity in movies. From his iconic Man with No Name role in Sergio Leone's trio of spaghetti westerns, to his gnarly San Francisco police officer Dirty Harry Callahan, to his crusty, intolerant curmudgeon in Gran Torino. I mention that because his latest film, Cry Macho, offers Eastwood a chance to look back on a long career often defined by its tough, machismo-soaked roles. Cry Macho won't go down as one of Eastwood's best films, nor is it the kind of movie that will change any minds about his work. Yet it's the type of stripped-down and straightforward story that's perfect for this stage in Clint's career. It's an endearing reflection wrapped in an overly simplified story that gets by, not because of the character on the screen, but because of the legend who fills his shoes. Then again, so much of Eastwood is packed into the character that you could call them inseparable. Set in 1979, Clint plays Mike Milo, a worn-down former rodeo champion working as a horse trainer for a wealthy rancher named Howard Polk, Dwight Yoakam. We first meet the unapologetically gruff Mike as he shuffles in late for work, again, prompting a fed-up Howard to fire his crusty ranch hand. But before doing so, Howard unloads with an exposition-heavy rebuke that only exists to lay out Mike's troubled backstory, his crippling rodeo accident, the addiction to pills and booze, the crushing family tragedy. This hurried and awkward opening continues 1 year later, when Howard shows up needing help. He wants Mike to go to Mexico City and bring back his estranged 13-year-old son, Raffo, Eduardo Minett, who lives with his wild and neglectful mother, Leda, Fernanda Urajola. "You owe me, Mike," he reminds the old cowboy. "Yeah, I owe ya," Mike replies, honoring an old-fashioned code that believes a man's word means something. The story then heads south of the border, where Mike finds young Raffo at a back-alley cockfight. The two don't exactly hit it off, But predictably over time, a bond develops between the old man, the young boy, and a rooster named Macho. Their road trip has its hazards: car thieves, the federals, latest goons. At the same time, the absurdity of it all isn't lost on Eastwood, who never misses a chance to squeeze out some pretty good laughs. Despite all of its neo-Western dressing, Cry Macho is actually pretty mellow and is much more interested in the two lost wandering souls than its low-key thriller elements. This becomes clearer when the movie takes a sudden detour, eventually settling down in a small Mexican village. There, Raffo gets his first feel of stability, while Mike's leathery exterior begins to soften thanks to the kindness of a local cantina owner, Natalia Travin. This is where the movie really hits its free and easy stride. The aggressively simple story has its obvious conveniences and missing details which Eastwood has no interest in exploring. But that's consistent with Clint's signature efficiency and clear-minded classicism. It's the emotional and even spiritual undercurrent that ends up driving the movie. It's Eastwood's critical self-analysis and reflection mixed with a healthy dose of irony. It's the unexpected sweetness, warmth, and compassion. Ultimately, the mileage you get out of Cry Macho may hinge on your connection with its legendary star and director. If you've been with him for decades, this film will be a graceful extension of that journey. And while his latest won't be for everyone, it reminds me of how glad I am that Clint Eastwood is still making movies. I feel a little bad for Clint Eastwood. What do you do after you become a legend? Post Unforgiven. A film in which Eastwood wrestles with his own legacy and the Western genre as a whole. His directing career has become divided between prestige pictures like Mystic River, J. Edgar, and American Sniper. Films that seem designed to just pass the time, like Sully, Hereafter, and Changeling. And then there are the films that wrestle with legacy and old age. And in these films, Eastwood seems the most at home and personal. Movies like Million Dollar Baby and Gran Torino may not be perfect, but they show Eastwood grappling with his own image and what he will pass on to a future generation. And it's in this vein that he directs one of his best films since Unforgiven, Cry Macho. The plot is barely there, but it doesn't matter because it's not a plot-driven film. It's a movie where Eastwood gives up the grit and gravel voice tough guy for something quieter. It's an embrace of the domestic. And it's here that Eastwood brings an unexpected warmth to the picture that makes Cry Macho a surprisingly lovely experience. Set in 1980, Michael Milo, Eastwood, is a broken-down old cowboy. He used to be a rodeo star with a knack for training horses, but that was a long time ago. His old employer, Howard, Dwight Yoakam, comes to Milo asking the old guy to go down to Mexico and retrieve Howard's estranged teenage son, Raffo, Eduardo Minett, with whom Howard would like to restore their relationship. Milo at first refuses, but Howard reminds Milo that he floated the old cowboy through tough times and will continue to do so if Milo does him this favor. So Milo heads down to Mexico, finds the boy in the streets cockfighting with his rooster Macho, and convinces the kid to come back with him to Texas. However, along the way, they both find that a better life may be waiting for them away from America. For its first act, you're not really sure what Cry Macho is trying to do or where it's going. But when you pull back and look at the full picture, you see that Eastwood is reframing his thoughts on his masculinity. You have to remember that when it comes to macho Hollywood guys, Eastwood helped define the role with his work in westerns as well as the Dirty Harry franchise. Unforgiven turns all of that on its head in a compelling, thoughtful way. But what do you do after you create one of the greatest westerns of all time? What do you do after that kind of statement? Eastwood has been trying to figure that out for a couple decades now, and perhaps the answer lies in something as quiet and elegant as Cry Macho. Once you get past the first act where Raffo's mother, Fernanda Urahola, tries and fails to seduce Michael and Raffo start to bond, the film coheres when their car breaks down in a small town and they find the possibility of peace and settling down. While I wouldn't call Cry Macho a story of redemption, neither Michael nor Raffo have done anything particularly wrong. It is a story about finding peace, and that the way of conflict isn't to be invited or conquered. From its opening, beautiful shots from cinematographer Ben Davis, you can tell that Eastwood is going for something more pastoral and somber. This isn't the grizzled veteran telling a young man how to be a man by emulating his violent virtues, something Eastwood touched on with Gran Torino, but rather letting it all go to try and settle down. It's nice to see Eastwood embrace this vision of life. Nothing is going to erase the Man with No Name trilogy or the Dirty Harry movies. That legacy is secure. But Eastwood knows he's not that guy anymore, and it would be foolish to try. So instead, it's better to be grizzled, slow-moving Eastwood, and riding around with him and Raffo is like spending time with your grandpa Clint. Sure, he may be a little ornery, but he's also full of wisdom, and he's got a good heart. He's suffered and he's barely figured life out, but at least he knows it. He's no longer carrying around anger, and any attempts to be macho at this time just look silly, which is why Macho is personified by a literal cock. Not only that, but twice in the film when it looks like the only way out of a situation is through violence, Macho comes flying out, attacks the attacker, and the rooster, Raffo, and Michael are able to get away. In this way, Macho becomes a spirit animal of sorts, channeling the violence that Eastwood no longer wishes to perform or embrace. It's also legitimately funny to watch some guy get owned multiple times by a rooster. I don't know what the grace note looks like on Clint Eastwood's career, and I think something he struggled with is that he doesn't know either. At times, it seems like filmmaking is merely a hobby for him. He makes relatively low-cost pictures for one studio, Warner Bros. His prestige is enough to secure the financing and distribution, and he gets his films in on time and under budget. While this has led to some deeply underwhelming affairs and at times maddening efforts, hello, Jersey boys, you try telling a 91-year-old Hollywood legend that it's time to hang it up. You can't force a grace note, but Cry Macho is as graceful as Eastwood has been in a long time. Mike Milo is a former rodeo rider and horse trainer, an ornery old cuss with a complicated past and a soft spot for children and animals. He's a grouch, but also a professional, with a deep knowledge of his craft and a flinty sense of honor. To put it in simpler terms, he's played by Clint Eastwood. Eastwood also directed Cry Macho in a stripped-down, laid-back style that perfectly suits Mike's approach to life. Sometimes in Eastwood's films, going all the way back to Play Misty for Me, there's daylight separating filmmaker and star, a palpable, if often subtle difference of perspective between the laconic, narrow-eyed man on screen and the sly, adventurous artist behind the camera. This time, maybe not so much, which is just fine. Mike has a risky job to do, but he approaches his duties with no particular urgency, preferring to drive slowly and take in the scenery. Eastwood, notionally committed to doing something in the angry dad revenge rescue genre, uses the plot, supplied by Nick Schenk and N. Richard Nash's script, based on a novel by Nash, as an excuse for a leisurely excursion through a picturesque landscape. Mike is on a mission, yes, racing the clock and pursued by dangerous hombres on both sides of the law. But that doesn't prevent him from rolling into a quiet Mexican hamlet and remarking to his companions, "This looks like an interesting town. Let's check it out." Those companions are a 13-year-old boy named Raffo, Eduardo Minett, and Raffo's prized fighting rooster, Macho, a noble bird who gives the film its title and its theme. Raffo, abandoned by his Texan father and abused by his Mexican mother, is attached both to Macho and to an ideal of tough, strutting masculinity. One of Mike's tasks is to offer, by precept and example, an alternative way of being a man. Nothing too soft, mind you. This is still Clint Eastwood we're talking about, but a more patient, less furious approach to life. This macho thing is overrated, Mike says. You think you have all the answers, but then you get older and realize you don't have any. By the time you figure it out, it's too late. What that amounts to is a benign form of fatalism, a humility that the rest of the movie upholds. The button-pushing and liberal baiting that flared in The Mule and Richard Jewell aren't much in evidence here, and the canonical Eastwood persona, the avenger of innocence who dwells in legal and moral gray zones, is in a state of semi-retirement. There is evil in the universe, but it might not be entirely his problem. The opening scenes suggest otherwise. Raffo's father, Howard Dwight Yoakam, a big-shot Texas rancher and Mike's former boss, dispatches Mike to Mexico to collect the boy. Though Mike doesn't much like Howard, he feels a sense of obligation, since Howard helped him get back on his feet after a series of personal tragedies. Once across the Rio Grande, Mike finds Howard's nutcase ex-wife in her bedroom, and their son at a cockfighting ring. It's 1980, by the way. The existence of GPS, cell phones, and heavy security on the United States-Mexican border would spoil the atmosphere. Mike, Raffo, and Macho light out in a series of Detroit junkers, mostly stolen, though nobody seems to mind, pursued by Mom's nasty boyfriend and the occasional federales. Now and then, Mike calls Howard from a payphone. The whole project turns out to be more complicated than it seemed at first. Don't trust anyone is Raffo's mantra. That may be too sweeping, but don't trust anyone played by Dwight Yoakam is a pretty good rule of thumb. As the old man, the boy, and the chicken make their way down the highway, you can anticipate the turns the story will take, but not quite. The twists arrive, but not with the impact you might expect. What started as a thriller takes a long detour into the pastoral, as car trouble strands our travelers in a quiet village with a sweet cantina run by a widow named Marta, Natalia Travin. She and Mike get up to some heavy Bridges of Madison County-style flirting, while Raffo spends time with one of her granddaughters. There are some wild horses that need breaking and other animals to look at, and whatever else needs to be dealt with can just wait a while. Maybe this will make you restless. Maybe you want car chases, gunfights, quotable catchphrases, and somber meditations on violence, justice, and the American West. If so, there's a whole Clint Eastwood filmography to peruse. This one is something different. A deep cut for the diehards, a hangout movie with nothing much to prove and just enough to say, with a pleasing score by Mark Mancina and some lovely desert scenery shot by Ben Davis. If the old man's driving, my advice is to get in and enjoy the ride. Clint Eastwood is 91-90 at the time of filming this, to save you the inconvenience of wikiing what all of us wonder these days when he comes out with something new. Eastwood is a master filmmaker, so when something new of his comes out, especially when he stars in it, it has to be checked and reviewed. We can't win them all, though, as we see with this milquetoast and almost pointless movie of his. It's 1979, and Eastwood plays Mike Milo, a retired rodeo legend and keeper of horses. Milo is hired by his boss, Howard Polk, Dwight Yoakam, to retrieve Polk's son from his affluent yet trashy mother across the border in Mexico. The boy is Rafael, Eduardo Minett, who may or may not relent to Milo's new leadership. Upon finding him, Milo takes the boy and his fighting cock, Macho, north towards the border, making friends and enemies along the way. It's remarkable to watch Eastwood in this, one of the last true bona fide movie stars. The man is 90, yet his performance is totally lucid, somehow more alert and respecting of the dialogue than younger Eastwoods might have been. It really is a joy to watch him, so bright and full of vigor, none of it looking forced, as in trying to appear young. Also directed by him, the film also has its visual highlights. Eastwood knows what he's doing when he allows the viewer to soak up certain scenes and settings. Plot: an over-the-hill cowboy accepts a job to bring back his former boss's son to the U.S. from Mexico. Along the way, he bonds with the boy and teaches him about life, love, and what it takes to be a man. Review: critics weren't kind to Cry Macho when it debuted in theaters earlier this year, and the movie quickly faded from movie screens. I gotta say, it's a shame that the film was so easily dismissed and forgotten, because although Cry Macho is hardly one of Eastwood's masterworks, it is a very well-told, extremely well-made, not to mention beautifully photographed film that boasts another charismatic turn from everyone's favorite tough guy, who gets to show his gentler side this time around. Eastwood plays Mike Milo, a fallen, aging cowboy whose good days are far behind him. Mike's been through hell, and Eastwood perfectly portrays his character's loss behind his weary eyes and tired demeanor. When Mike's old boss, a slimy Dwight Yoakam, turns up and blackmails him into retrieving his wayward son from Mexico, Mike has little option but to comply. Mike tracks the kid named Raffo down at a cockfight, where Raffo's prized fighting cock named Macho is expected to win, but the two are forced together when the authorities show up and crash the main event. At first, Mike and Raffo don't get along. He's old and crabby, and Rafa is a young know-it-all who won't back down, but the pair soon form a bond and discover that each of them carries a wounded soul and heavy heart. As I mentioned earlier, Cry Macho is hardly reinventing the wheel when it comes to feel-good drama, but under the assured direction of Eastwood, and thanks to his intimate, laid-back performance, we are given a very well-made, sincerely told film that is more about genuine character development than over-the-top dramatic fireworks. It's also one of Eastwood's better cast films, with youngster Eduardo Minett as Raffo giving a star-making turn as the hard-luck kid with a heart of gold. Natalia Travin is superb as Marta, the tough and lonely widow who catches Mike's eye. As we've come to expect from Eastwood, the film is full of humor and colorful characters, and on that front, Cry Macho delivers when Mike and Raffo are forced to crash in a desolate town, populated eccentric locals, all of whom seem to think that Mike is some kind of savant with animals when he cures their pets' ailments. Eastwood seems to take pure delight in performing in this part of the film, and it's by far the most easygoing and relaxed he's ever appeared in a film. As was the case with his earlier hits, Every Which Way But Loose and Any Which Way You Can, Eastwood isn't afraid to be upstaged by an animal for the sake of laugh, and Raffo's rooster Macho gets the better of Mike in some scenes. Cinematographer Ben Davis has done a fantastic job with this film, and his cinematography is nothing short of stunning, perfectly capturing sun-drenched vistas and bolting horses in a field overflowing with leaves. Cry Macho is one of the best-looking Eastwood efforts in recent memory, and its gorgeous camera work begs for the film to be seen on the big screen. While it's nothing revolutionary, and it certainly isn't an action movie, Cry Macho is a feel-good film for these hard times we live in, and it's one that brought a smile to my face several times. Clint Eastwood has often shown a weakness for corn, usually tempered by the unfussy efficiency of his direction, and in movies where he does double duty in front of the camera by his mythical screen persona. But in Cry Macho, the corn is inescapable. A project that has kicked around for some 40 years, the film was planned at various times as a vehicle for, among others, Roy Scheider and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Whether either of those actors would have been more persuasive, we can only guess. But this is a story so crusty and antiquated in its conveniently resolved conflicts, contrivances, and drippy sentimentality that it should have been left on the shelf. Nobody takes pleasure in beating up on an esteemed veteran, but it's borderline ridiculous to watch Eastwood wheeze and shuffle his way through a role with a whiff of the white savior, in which not one but two attractive younger senoras, one evil and loca, the other a saint, want to jump his arthritic bones. The late writer N. Richard Nash penned the screenplay, originally titled Macho, in the early 70s. When it was turned down by multiple studios, he expanded it into a novelization that only then was optioned for the screen, drifting in and out of development for decades. Nick Schenk was brought in to tailor the material for Eastwood, having written The Mule and Gran Torino, the latter of which shares this film's central melodramatic dynamic of a gruff oldster softened by his unexpected friendship with a teenage boy. But as told here, Cry Macho is a story drained of all nuance, with the simplistic blandness of a bad YA novel. It's the kind of movie where, rather than let the audience observe the gradual development of a mutual understanding, we get Eastwood's Mike Milo spelling it out in lines like, "You're kind of growing on me, kid." Mike is a 5-time rodeo champion whose riding career was derailed by an accident. Booze and pills followed, along with the tragic loss of his wife and son. In 1979, a year after firing Mike from his position as a horse trainer, wealthy rancher Howard Polk, Dwight Yoakam, calls on him for a one-time job. Howard is unable to cross the border into Mexico for legal reasons. He wants Meek to go and fetch his 13-year-old son, Raffo, Eduardo Minett, whom he says is being abused in the care of his crazy mother, Leda, Fernanda Urahola, in Mexico City. A brush with Leda and her thuggish security team shows Mike why Raffo chooses to stay on the streets, making enough cash to get by with his fighting rooster, named Macho. Cue much folksy wisdom about strength, toughness, and masculinity, with the youngster dismissing Mike as washed up and weak, until the gringo shows him a thing or two about rough-hewn resilience. Raffo is reluctant to accompany Mike back to Texas at first, having no more reason to trust the father that abandoned him than he does his cold-hearted mother. But Mike persuades him by relaying Howard's promise that he'll have the run of the ranch and his own horse. The majority of the action covers the return journey, with delays caused by car theft, engine trouble, and pursuit by both the federal police and Leda's men. But there's a sleepy quality to the storytelling, with none of the conflict ever packing enough menace to create suspense. Instead, Cry Macho starts to resemble an old-school Disney TV movie about a pair of unlikely buddies who have much to learn from one another. Then there's the gentle romance. Veering off the main roads to avoid detection, Mike and Raffo stumble onto a desert cantina run by Marta, Natalia Travin, a kind widow raising her orphan granddaughters. She takes Mike and Raffo in, and for reasons that have less to do with narrative logic than formula rules, they stick around for a few weeks. That allows Mike to exchange tender glances with Marta over tortillas while Raffo gets close to her eldest granddaughter, Alida Munoz. The interlude also gives Mike a chance to brush up on his horseman skills, breaking in wild mustangs and teaching Raffo to ride in what seems like a remarkably short time. The pedestrian screenplay seldom leaves much doubt about where it's headed. The biggest surprise is the way it exposes Howard's shady reasons for wanting his son back as leverage. That makes him not much better than Leda. Mike is pretty much delivering the boy from one unfit parent to another. By that time, however, Cry Macho has abruptly shifted gears to be about the old cowboy's second chance, ending on a note of sweet schmaltz. The kid basically becomes a pawn in world-weary Mike's redemption tale. This is a minor entry in the filmography of the prolific Eastwood's twilight years, and while it provides the actor with opportunities for self-deprecating digs at his legendary persona, this macho thing is overrated. The writing is too tin-eared and unsubtle for those observations to land. The customarily sinewy direction also has a disappointing slackness, yielding some lackluster performances. Only D.P. Ben Davis's atmospheric shooting of the occasional sweeping landscape gives this feeble movie some breadth. Eastwood is reframing his thoughts on his masculinity. You have to remember that when it comes to macho Hollywood guys, Eastwood helped define the role with his work in westerns as well as the Dirty Harry franchise. Unforgiven turns all of that on its head in a compelling, thoughtful way. But what do you do after you create one of the greatest westerns of all time? What do you do after that kind of statement? Eastwood has been trying to figure that out for a couple decades now, and perhaps the answer lies in something as quiet and elegant as Cry Macho. Once you get past the first act Werafo's mother,
Fernanda Irola tries and fails to seduce Michael, and Raffo start to
bond. The film coheres when their car breaks down in a small town and they find the possibility of peace and settling down. While I wouldn't call Cry Macho a story of redemption, neither Michael nor Raffo have done anything particularly wrong. It is a story about finding peace, and that the way of conflict isn't to be invited or conquered. From its opening, beautiful shots from cinematographer Ben Davis, you can tell that Eastwood is going for something more pastoral and somber. This isn't the grizzled veteran telling a young man how to be a man by emulating his violent virtues, something Eastwood touched on with Gran Torino, but rather letting it all gotta try and settle down. It's nice to see Eastwood embrace this vision of life. Nothing is going to erase the man with Non-Aim Trilogy or the Dirty Harry movies. That legacy is secure, but Eastwood knows she's not that guy anymore, and it would be foolish to try, so instead it's better to be grizzled, slow-moving Eastwood and riding around. With a mandrill voice like spending time with your grandpa, Clint's sure he may be a little ornery, but he's also full of wisdom and he's got a good heart. The suffered, and he's barely figured life out, but at least the knowseth he's no longer carrying around anger, and any attempts to be macho at this time just look silly. which is why Macho is personified by a literal, not only that but twice in the film, when it looks likely the only way out of a situation is through violence. Macho comes flying out, attacks the attacker and the rooster. Fo and Michael are able to get away in this way. Macho becomes a spirit animal of sorts, channeling the violence that East no longer wishes to perform or embrace. It's also legitimately funny to watch some guy get owned multiple times by a rooster. I don't know what the grace note looks like on Clint Eastwood's career, and I think something he struggled with is that he doesn't know either. At times it seems like filmmaking is merely a hobby for him. He makes relatively low-cost pictures for one studio, Warner Bros. His prestige is enough to secure the financing and distribution, and he gets his films in on time and under budget. While this has led to some deeply underwhelming affairs and at times maddening efforts, shallow Jersey boys Utri telling a 91-year-old Hollywood legend that it's time to hang it up. You can't force a grace note, but cry. Macho is as graceful as Eastwood has been in a long time. Other information about this film at 91. Clint Eastwood still knows how to direct a movie with a nice, clean, leisurely, classical spareness. Something you wish more directors knew how to do or wanted to as a filmmaker, be called ageless as an actor, though he's not trying to hide his age in Cry Macho. He plays a broken-down horse breeder and former rodeo rider who is given the task of going down to Mexico City to retrieve a 13-year-old boy, Rafael Eduardo, Minett, and drive him back to Texas. He's taking the boy from his wealthy diva Mexican mother and bringing him to his American ranch. Owner Father Eastwood is still handsome, and he still does. The Clint sneer with one side of his mouth open a tiny bit wider than the other side, but the Clint we see in Crime. Macho is bent over with a carefully combed shock of gray-white hair, skin like creased parchment, and eyes that gleam with an old person's primal vulnerability. His movements are careful, and when he speaks, the words float out of his windpipe in a way that's so cracked and dry and deliberate that at moments you can hear the old Eastwood minimalism shading off into a new Eastwood fragility. What's gone from this slow-talking, slow-moving Clint is any sense of impending danger. He throws a punch or two in Cry Macho and does it convincingly. But he also takes senior citizen siestas, and it's not as if his character is pretending that he can use his sheer strength to dominate the much younger scoundrels, bruisers, and federales who are on his tail. The way Eastwood dominates now is with the pensive simplicity of his words. His eyes say what I mean and mean what I say. Steely gentleman's directness, which has become his archaic form of machismo. How is the movie adapted from Richard Nash's 1975 novel? The script is by Nash and Eastwood. Regular Nick Schenk. It's friendly and diverting and formulaic in an inoffensive and good-natured way. And it's a totally minor affair. It's set in 1979 after Clint's Mike Milo has been fired by Howard Polk, his boss at the ranch, played by a blustery Dwight Yoakam. But as we learn, Mike owes Howard a lot. He saved Mike's life after he bottomed out, so when Mike is asked to head over the border to retrieve Howard's estranged son, he's got little choice but to go. The destination is a mansion in Mexico City, where the boy's reckless and debauched mother, Fernanda Urola, warns Mike that the kid is a wild thing out in the gutter, attending fights, and God knows what else she asks Mike to please. Take him, and good riddance, actually, though she needs to hold on to her son to provide leverage for an investment deal. We're led to think that we're going to be seeing the poster child for unruly movie delinquency. But Mike shows up at a fight where it takes him about 3 seconds to find the boy and his pet rooster named Macho. Our first reaction is the kid seems pretty nice, and so does the rooster. They are Eduardo Minett, who has been a regular on several Mexican TV series, has a baby-faced wholesomeness and a sweet-spirited manner. Rafael has every right to be surly about Mike, taking him away, but we can see from the start that he's no delinquent. His mother is just projecting. Mike still has to win him over, of course, but the movie might have had more bite to it. If Rafael were in greater need of taming, he and Mike pile into Mike's two-tone Chevy Suburban and head out on the road, during which they'll get to know each other and undergo a few adventurous ordeals, none of which ever turns too dark. The car gets stolen, but that's okay. They'll soon find an abandoned one in a parking lot. The locals get heated over what this aging gringo is doing, traveling with a Mexican kid. But that's okay. They soon turn their aggression on the sinister henchman who's trying to bring the boy back sitting down for lunch. Raphael casually orders a tequila, but that's okay. Mike waves the order away and sets him straight. You get too angry. Raphael tells Mike it's not good for you at your age. He's right about that, but Cry Macho isn't an angry Clint movie by the time these two arrive at a makeshift ranch and Mike starts teaching the kid to ride horses. We realize that we're watching the closest thing we've seen to a Clint Eastwood after-school special late in the film. Clint tells the kid, whom he calls kid. Yes, it's that kind of movie. The macho thing is overrated, which actually sounds like just the sort of reflective, ancient and wiser red states shading into blue idea that you want to hear from the preeminent macho movie star of the last half-century. The nonagenarian Clint says it like he means. The truth is, though, that the rest of the movie doesn't quite bear it out. Even though he doesn't rule physically anymore, the Clint we see in Cry Macho is just as rooted in the domineering presence of his mystique as he ever was. He's just quieter about it, the movie. Turns into a romance when they're at that ranch. The woman who runs the adjoining cantina cooks for them, and she and Clint strike up a flirtation, so sly it kind of sneaks its way into the movie. The actress Natalia Travin has a face that seems to have lived just like Clint's, and it's sweet to see them pair off, but it's not more than sweet cry. Macho is a pleasant enough placeholder for Eastwood, but I hope and suspect that down the line he's got some more machos. To cry positive elements, Mike does what he considers to be the right thing. Several times in the course of his journey, he sets off to bring Rafa home because of a deep-rooted sense of responsibility to Howard. Even though he doesn't really like the smarmy side of the man much, he also steps up to protect Rafa at different points and forges a special kinship with the boy, even looking upon him with pride as the teen works hard at learning to ride and break a horse while talking to young Rafa. Mike expresses his feelings about the whole idea of being tough and macho. He used to think it's so important. But with age, he's found that trying to be a macho guy involved more pointless pain than anything else when you're young. You think you have all the answers, and then you get older and realize you don't have any. He declares a Mexican woman named Marta offers kindness to Mike and Rafa when they're down and out, and eventually the two guys are welcomed in as parts of her makeshift family. She has taken on responsibility for her daughter's children after the young woman's untimely death. In spite of himself, Mike begins to feel a lost sense of happiness while in a strange place because of a stranger's kindness. Spiritual elements while on the run from Mexican authorities, Mike and Rafa spend a couple nights in a small Catholic shrine that features a statue of the Virgin Mary. Rafa asks Mary to grant them forgiveness for the trespass. Then he asks Mike if he believes in God. Mike replies, I guess. But Rafa goes on to suggest that if Mike isn't Catholic, then God doesn't believe in him. Marta prays when Mike and Rafa join her family for dinner, thanking God for the meal and the opportunity to help others. Sexual content, we see young American women in low-cut tops crossing the border for fun.
On a Mexican beach, Rafa's mother wears a slinky dress at a party and later
changes into a cleavage-bearing nightgown. She offers Mike a drink and a chance to celebrate in her bed, but he refuses. Rafa wonders if his mother sold him to Mike as a sexual object when they first meet. He later claims he'll accuse Mike of raping him if Mike doesn't do as he says. In both cases, Mike rebuffs Rafa's statements as foolishness later. Rafa explains that when he was living with his mother, she always brought different men home and coaxed Rafa to call then Uncle Mike and Marta slow dance and end with a kiss, violent. Content, we see an old video clip of a younger Mike riding a horse that falls and crushes his leg. Several men fight in the street. A thug tries to grab Rafa and Mike punches him in the face. The guy then tries to incite a small crowd of men to stop the gringo, but Rafa steps up and shows the crowd dark bruises across his back that he claims the man caused, and the group of men ends up beating the thug instead. Rafa explains to Mike that the bruises were simply the consequence of living on the streets for too long. Rafa has a rooster named Macho that he is raised to fight in fights, though we never see the bird battle with other roosters. It does launch itself at Rafa's. Human attackers several times slashing at their faces and legs. Mike threatens, only half-jokingly, to wring the bird's neck. A guy runs Mike and Rafa off the road by slamming his larger vehicle into their car. He then pulls out a gun, but is disarmed, crude or profane language about 15 words, 10 uses of A and 6. Exclamations of H are joined here by several uses each of DN, BCH, and Bard. God's and Jesus names are misused a dozen times total, 6 of those combining God with DN drug and alcohol content after Mike has a brutal fall during a ride that shattered his leg. We're told that he hit the pills pretty heavily. After his wife and son died in a car wreck, he became an addict with his consumption of both pills and booze. Mike drinks a brandy with someone, and when stopping at a small roadside restaurant, Rafa orders a bottle of Killa Mike, refuses to let him drink it and sends the bottle back, but Rafa ends up gulping down Mike's beer instead. A Feder Ale rips up Mike and Rafa's car looking for drugs that he never finds. Rafa says that one of his mother's lovers used to supply her with drugs, other negative elements. As the story unfolds, we find that both Howard and his ex-wife are lying to Mike and manipulating him. We hear that Rafa is well-versed in theft, and we see that proven as he later steals Mike's wallet and a couple different cars. In turn, Mike's truck is stolen by 2 other toughs on the street. Conclusion: you catch fleeting moments in Cry Macho of the far more appetizing film that could have been made in its stead. There are hasty glimpses of wise life lessons and loving encouragements that never fully take shape on screen. Instead, this pick sports a script that's sun-bleached and flavorless. Its main star power ingredient is a bit too far past his sell-by date, and the whole shebang just feels undercooked. Add in a heavy layer of foul language, and you've got a less than palatable piece that's a little tough to chew. What you need to know: Cry Macho stars Clint Eastwood as Mike Milo, a one-time rodeo star and retired rodeo horse breeder and trainer. A year after his friend and boss fires him, the boss asks Mike to travel to Mexico City and take back his 13-year-old boy Rafael from the boys. Criminal alcoholic mother Mike convinces Rafael to come to Texas, but the mother sends a henchman after them, so they take the back roads. Eventually, they hide out in a sleepy little border town. They befriend a widowed woman who owns a small restaurant and takes care of her orphaned grandchildren. Meanwhile, Mike helps a local rancher train wild horses, and Rafael learns to ride Cry. Macho is a strange hybrid of action, heartwarming, and redemptive storytelling and romance, so it meanders and seems too low-key and laid-back. Cry Macho has some strong Christian content and touching morally uplifting moments. Thus, there are references to Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and God and the widowed grandmother praised before a meal. However, Cry Macho is marred by a lot of foul language, including numerous gratuitous profanities, content-dominant worldview, and other worldview contentments. Strong Christian moral worldview about a man finding redemption in a new home by mentoring the teenage son of his former boss and finding a new love in the form of a devout Catholic woman who runs a restaurant and takes care of her orphan grandchildren. But the man himself is a normal believer in God and cusses, though the teenage boy he mentors has faith in God and comes from a Catholic background. Plus, there's a small building with a cross on top that inside holds a shrine to the Virgin Mary with a cross on one or more of the walls. Inside, foul language, about 38 obscenities, some S and many H words, 10 strong profanities, and one light profanity violence. Bad guy runs the good guy's car off the road. Bad. Guy pulls a gun on a man and teenage boy, but he loses the gun and they take his car. Teenage boy has bruises on his back from being beaten. Police raid an underground fighting event and chase after the people there. An image of a rodeo athlete falling from a bronco onto his back, and a man accuses older man of kidnapping teenage beau, but boy accuses him of beating him and shows his bruised back to some bystanders, and the bystanders start beating up the younger man as the other two escape in a car. More detail. Cry Macho star Clint Eastwood as a one-time rodeo star and retired rodeo horse breeder and trainer who takes a job to travel to Mexico City and bring a 13-year-old boy home to his male father in Texas and away from the boy's criminal alcoholic mother. Also directed by Eastwood, Cry Macho is a strange hybrid of dramatic action, heartwarming, redemptive storytelling, and romance with some strong overt Christian content that's marred by a lot of foul language, including numerous gratuitous profanities. The movie opens in 1979. Eastwood plays Mike Milo, a one-time rodeo star whose wife and son died in a tragic car accident. Mike works for an old friend named Howard a year later. Howard comes to Mike asking for a favor you owe me. Howard tells Milo, and Milo agrees. Howard wants Mike to travel to Mexico City to retrieve Raffo, Howard's 13-year-old son Raphael, whom Howard hasn't seen for 7 years. Howard's estranged wife is not a reliable person, and Howard has heard Raphael is in some kind of trouble. He gives Milo a wad of cash to pay for expenses. Milo gets to Mexico City and learns Raffo's mother lives in a fancy henda, but is somewhat of a lush who sleeps around and is involved in some kind of criminal activity. She tells Milo that Raffo ran away from home and lives on the streets, where he supports himself by engaging in fighting and petty crimes. She tries to seduce Milo even in the presence of her current lover and right-hand man, but Milo is disgusted. Milo leaves her henda and goes looking for Raffo at the nearest illegal fight. Sure enough, he finds Raffo, who's about to unleash his pet rooster Macho to fight another rooster. The police show up, but Milo and Raffo manage to hide from them in the chaos. Milo approaches Raffo and tells him his father in Texas wants him to come live with him in Texas on his ranch. Raffo is skeptical. However, he tells Milo he doesn't trust anyone, but Milo convinces him that the offer from his father is real. Raffo seems convinced. He tells Milo he has to gather some of his things, but he disappears on Mike Milo and doesn't meet up with him, like he said the next morning. However, while Mike is driving back to Texas, Rafa shows up in the back seat with his rooster. Mike is upset and tells Raffo to get out of the car. However, he soon relents and they resume the journey back to Texas at their first stop to eat, though they run into the mother's man Aurelio, who's tracked them down in front of a bunch of Mexican men in the parking lot. Aurelio accuses Milo of kidnapping Raffo. The men start approaching Mike, but Raffo shows the bruises he's received recently on his back from Aurelio, and the men start beating him up instead. Mike and Raffo scuttle in Mike's car. Mike decides to take the back roads back to Texas. Eventually, when Mike's car gets stolen and the second car breaks down, they end up in a sleepy little border town. They decide to hide out there. They befriend a devout Catholic woman named Marta, who runs a small restaurant while taking care of her orphaned grandchildren. Meanwhile, Mike Milo helps a small R train wild horses, and Raffo learns to ride. Friendship and romance blossom, and Mike finds a new home, but the long arm of the Federals and Raffo's mother soon interrupts their idyllic respite as a drama cry. Macho veers from being a touching coming-of-age story and a heartwarming story of redemption to a tale of romance and dramatic action. It takes its time with all these stories and subplots, so it may be too laid back for those wanting something more edgy, more active, or more plot-driven. Raffo's mother seems a bit too young for Raffo's father also. Eastwood shows his age in a few scenes, such as when he dances with the Catholic grandmother. Otherwise, however, he seems much younger than his real age, which is 90, when he filmed the movie Cry. Macho has strong Christian content, There are references to Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Also, the Catholic grandmother leads a mealtime prayer in one scene, and Mike, Milo, and Raffo discuss the existence of God in Waf. Another scene, finally, the movie's theme song is a strong country song that starts off with an appeal to the Lord as the singer says it's never too late to find a new home over Clint Eastwood's decades-long career. The Western is a genre in which he's made a considerable impact. Some of his finest works, including Best Picture winner Unforgiven, were Westerns, which is why it's always interesting to see the Hollywood legend return to this well. Never one to slow down, the now 91-year-old Eastwood directs and stars in Cry Macho, based on the novel of the same name by N. Richard Nash, who also co-wrote the screenplay. A few of Eastwood's late-period films have been well received, but this one falls short of the mark a bit. Cry Macho is a fairly standard Western, hampered by a thin story which prevents it from reaching the heights of Eastwood's storied filmography. Eastwood stars as Mike Milo, a former rodeo star who fell on hard times after suffering a tragedy. One day, Mike's former boss, Howard Dwight Yoakam, asks him for a favor. Howard wants Mike to travel to Mexico and bring Howard's son, Rafael Eduardo Minett, to Texas, citing concerns the boy's mother, Leda Fernanda Urola, is constantly abusing him. Mike agrees to take the job and goes south of the border to find Rafael. From there, the two have to avoid the authorities and let his hired muscle in order to get back to the United States. Eastwood's always been an economical filmmaker, and Cry Macho doesn't waste any time in setting up the story and bringing viewers right into the plot. While that approach is welcome, Cry Macho runs 104 minutes. The primary issue is there isn't much to the narrative in terms of developments or thematic material. The story itself is quite simple, and any attempts to dig deeper below the surface, whether it's Raphael's troubled childhood or the elderly Mike's perspective on being macho, fail to leave much of an impression. Cry Macho plays with some interesting ideas, especially considering Eastwood's on-screen past and image, though. There isn't enough there to make it stand out as one of the director's better offerings. The emotional core of Cry Macho is in the dynamic between Mike and Raphael, and the two make for a solid pair, whether they're carrying the film's more dramatic moments or injecting a bit of levity aspects of their relationship. May come across as predictable. Raphael is in need of a dependable father figure, but their connection still feels earned. Minett does a good job as Raphael, finding a balance between a street-smart teen and vulnerable child looking for someone to trust. Eastwood is characteristically reliable, channeling his typical persona to bring gravitas to Mike. However, an argument can be made that at 91 he is a bit too old with regards to a subplot where he becomes something of a romantic interest for widowed grandmother Martin Natalia. Travin as nostalgic it is to see Eastwood and his cowboy get up riding horses. Certain elements of the character's story don't land as well. Unfortunately, Mike and Raphael are the only characters with real meat to their portrayals. A majority of the supporting cast consists of stock characters that exist mainly to serve a purpose in the story. Horatio Garcia Roalcillo is just an obstacle that gets in Mike and Raphael's way for a few confrontations which are easily resolved. And Travin doesn't have much to do as Marta. This does allow Eastwood to keep the focus on Mike and Raphael's journey. But the two-dimensional ensemble does make the film drag a bit in the middle section, which could cause some viewers to invested since the story is so thin. It is impressive to see Eastwood continue to churn out films as a director and actor, pulling triple duty for Cry Macho, as he serves as producer as well. And diehard fans who have been following his career for years will likely find something to enjoy and appreciate. However, when compared to some of Eastwood's best works, and even a handful of his more recent efforts, Macho is lacking what's necessary to be a real crossover hit, and it likely won't be much of a factor come award season. Those who love Westerns and Eastwood may be inclined to seek Cry Macho out on the big screen if they feel safe, but Everyone else can catch it on HBO Max. There's something comforting about seeing Eastwood in another Western. But that's not enough to truly elevate this particular film. This film, directed by, screenplay by Nick Schenk and Richard Nash, based on Cry Macho by N. Richard Nash, produced by Albert's Ruddy, Tim Moore, Jessica Meier, Clint Eastwood, starring Clint Eastwood, Dwight Yoakam. Cinematography, Ben Davis, edited by Joel Cox, David Cox, music by Mark Mann. Production company, Malpaso Productions, distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures. Release date, September 17, 2021. Running time, 104 minutes, country, United States. Languages, English, Spanish, budget $133. Million box office, $165 million. So guys, this is the review of Cry Macho movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share, and thanks for watching.